We're live. We're live. Okay, so welcome to the WordPress and Higher Education WP Campus Podcast. We're number 3, and we're talking multi-site. So we've got 4 esteemed people in the. We had 4. We lost one. We got him back. Okay. Anyways, we had 4, and he'll be back sooner or later. So let's do a round of introductions. I'm Jonathan Perlman. I work at Dawson College in Montreal, Quebec. I use WordPress. I do multi-site. I do single site. I do PHP. I do a whole slew of stuff. That's me, and he's back. So let's go left to right, right to left. Doesn't really matter. Who's next?
Sure, I'll go. I'm Tim Owens. I work for Reclaim Hosting. It's a hosting company that focuses on education. Prior to that, I worked at the University of Mary Washington and Longwood University. So got about 10 years of higher ed experience and worked with a large multi-site platform, UMW Blogs, while I was at University of Mary Washington. We host a lot of large multi-sites today, so that's sort of my background.
Okay, so moving on. That'd be Peter, I guess.
Sure. Hey, I'm Peter Chester. I'm a partner at Modern Tribe. We are a design and development agency that does a lot of work with WordPress and recently have been doing a lot of higher ed projects, including Stanford Law, Harvard Law, the Conroe School District, which is like a totally different kind of thing. Yeah, I spent a lot of time working on this sort of thing.
All right, cool. So then I guess now Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy Feltz. I'm a senior WordPress engineer at Washington State University with the Central University Communications team. We have one really large multi-site install, and I'm also the multi-site core component maintainer with WordPress and the core committer.
Cool. Welcome. And last but not least.
Hi, I'm Curtis Carmella, and I am the senior web technologist at the University of Mary Washington. We run WordPress multi-site, actually run a WordPress multi-network installation for most of our public-facing web presence. And although I don't deal with it on a daily basis, Mary Washington also runs UMW Blogs, as Tim mentioned, and a few other WordPress instances here and there. So, but we deal almost exclusively with multi-site through just about everything we do in my office.
Okay, great. So it's great to have you guys on the show, and so we're going to talk multi-site today. So now, first we've got to define what is multi-site as a component of WordPress. So who wants to take that one?
It's a softball.
Okay.
So anybody?
It seems like I'm happy to. It seems like Jeremy, you might be the best position. Whatever.
So we'll just at its base, multi-sites is a single installation of WordPress that uses separates the sites out into multiple tables in your database, shares a core set of users, a core set of plugins, a core set of themes that you can then have quite a difficult time managing. Is that right? Or?
Yeah, and the plugins, there's you can have plugins that activate across all the sites or just across or on a specific site. The code, as Jeremy said, is one base of code. So when you deploy it, you're just deploying one base of code. You're not like doing lots of little installs of WordPress. But yeah, that sounds about right.
Now, the first question that somebody always asks is, do I need multi-site? Should I go to a multi-site? So now, what do we tell these people? Should they go to multi-site or not?
Clearly, it depends on their application. I mean, there are certainly a lot of pros to using multi-site. There are potential cons to using multi-site, and a lot of it depends on how they're planning on using it. There are schools of thought that believe that multi-site is purely for siloed instances of WordPress, the way that like WordPress.com is set up. There are schools of thought that think that WordPress multi-site is purely for kind of centralized management, the way we're using it for our public-facing websites, and then of course there are schools of thought that think you can do either one with it. But there are certainly cases where WordPress multi-site is probably not the best choice. It's just a matter of evaluating how they're planning on using WordPress and what they're planning, how they're planning on managing, and what they're planning on doing with it.
Can I actually poke at that a little, Curtis? Because I'm struggling. I know Micah from the WordPress org. She made a big point out of saying, hey, if you don't know why you're using multi-site, you should not use it. But I actually really enjoy using it. I'm on our team. I'm probably the guy who most easily goes to, let's just use multi-site, and because I see a lot of pros to it, and really, like, even if you just have one site, it's just a single site. I've had cases where it's just a site, and then later on I want to spin off little other versions of that, of a subdomain of that site, and it's just so easy to do as a multi-site install. Why would you not use it, even if, like, let's assume you want to do 2 or more sites for some reason? Why would you not use multi-site?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, multi-site takes a whole new level of understanding and management. I mean, you have to understand, there are going, as much as I hate it, there are still plugins that just don't play nicely with multi-site. They're becoming fewer and farther between, but there are still plugins where it's just a nightmare to try and manage them on a multi-site instance. You've got, again, you are working from a single code base, which we see as a pro in that it makes it a lot easier to manage. You can deploy once, but you're also working from a single code base. So if you introduce a fatal error somewhere along the way, everything that you're running just went down instead of a single individual site. You've also got to manage resources between those where, if you were to have 2 sites that could each, one of them's getting 100,000 hits a day, one of them's only getting 100 hits a day, that one getting 100 hits a day is going to suffer potentially from the one that's getting 100,000 hits a day, whereas if they were split out into 2 separate instances, you could potentially manage that a little more easily and not have to worry about it. Now, that said, I'm a huge proponent of multi-site, and like I said, we use it for just about everything as well. But you have to have an understanding of WordPress, and you have to dig into what WordPress multi-site means before I think you can really start to take off with using multi-site on the majority of your projects. I'll bet Jeremy has something to say about that.
Only a little. I mean, I think one key, metric would be how many people need complete autonomy. So if you have several different groups that are going to be doing completely different things and need to install plugin ABC and EFG or whatever, then you're going to start running into some problems, whether they're just annoying political problems or actual code problems. If you're doing, all of your sites are doing the same thing, or if there are just 1 or 2 people that need that kind of ability to install new code, then you're probably fine. But
yeah, to that point, like, I'm operating off of the general assumption, and this has been true for the vast majority of the projects I work on, that nobody's going to want to tinker with the code. As soon as you have somebody on one site that wants to tinker with code, then you should probably not do multi-site, because everyone else is going to suffer from that one site's, alterations.
But even thinking about, like, who's administering and who's managing those sites. I mean, for multi-site, it's great if they're all your sites, or you're the person who's in charge of what plugins go on there, what themes are we going to use on the various spaces. But as soon as I need to introduce another administrator, and what access do they have, of course, multi-site can handle all the user permissions up until you need to be the one actually installing new plugins or adding some extra code, as you said, in there. And at the point that someone says, hey, I went to add Google Analytics and I can't, well, now you're the guy that's got to come back in there and click the buttons to add in more plugins and introduce those, and now we're going to need to test those to make sure, like you said, they're not affecting other people and that kind of thing. And they might say, I thought this was my department site, and now you're saying, and for certain use cases, that absolutely makes sense, especially in higher education, that there would be some sort of chain of command there, and that there would be certain restrictions in place that somebody would need to sign off on that. For someone's personal site where I was helping them develop it, maybe not so much. Maybe they thought they were the administrator of their own site, and I was just helping them get it set up, and now they're a part of some multi-site network where I've got to be the person constantly enabling things for them. Or if I give them super admin access, now they have access to sites that they totally shouldn't have access to. So there are times where I think it probably makes sense to decouple some of that if these are, completely separate, spaces that need administrators that have full autonomy in them.
Yeah, and I would also add that there's a balancing act there too. So for instance, UMW Blogs. I mean, it's something that if the Division of Teaching and Learning Technologies, which is the office here that pretty much manages UMW Blogs, if they were to try and administer the thousands of blogs as separate instances, they'd never get anything done. So there's that balancing act of there are certainly people that need autonomy within UMW Blogs, and they've got the 943 plugins or whatever installed on it to show that. But there's also that matter of needing to administer it from a central location and being able to kind of manage it, and update that code once. It may take them a week to make sure that nothing major broke, when they run an update or something like that. But it's still a whole lot easier and a whole lot less time consuming than potentially administering, the 1,000 or 3,000 or whatever blogs they have on there at this point.
Now, at this point, for you guys that are managing larger sites, how do you actually get over the one-click update fear of the fact that things are going to break when you update a plugin or update core or updating the theme?
We said we did.
Yeah, we don't do one-click updates at all. We have our entire code base in version control, and we do very deliberate updates where we do a batch of updates with core and all the plugins, whatever. Then we do a thorough set of tests on it, and then we deploy it very carefully. Even if it's a security thing, we'll try to do a hotfix, but we're more inclined to be one dot version of WordPress behind, but at the latest security patch than on the latest version of WordPress, and like at risk of having to suddenly throw out a security patch to a giant network, But that's maybe a dirty little secret, but that's the truth of it.
Yeah, and I mean, from our perspective, there's we have. Within our office, we kind of manage two different installations, and one of them is not quite as gargantuan as the other, so it's still very easy and very quick to capture full backups of the system and everything, and we can also just deploy to a staging server immediately with that particular system, where we can test these. We do use the update within WordPress dashboard on that particular instance, because we can test it on our staging server over and over again, and if something breaks, we can figure out what it was, fix it, make sure it's fixed on production, and then push that button to update things. The other one, it takes a full day to capture a backup, and then transfer it to a staging server, and then hope that staging server stands up properly. So it's a little bit different process there, where we can't necessarily rely on that one-click update.
Well, and in some of the larger installs that I've seen, that when we talk about updates, it can get, as Curtis briefly mentioned with UMW Blogs, I think there are almost maybe 200 plugins on that multi-site installation. When you've got these legacy systems where you've over time accumulated a lot of cruft and things, but we can't get rid of that because there's a handful of sites using that one and that kind of thing, and you're serving an entire campus, then updates become problematic because you'll never be up to date. Even if we're not just talking WordPress core, you're talking the plugins. As soon as you push out a whole round of updates, tomorrow you've got 3 more notifications that there are new updates for various things. And so, I mean, there's two schools of thought on it. For a while, I know that the Division of Teaching and Learning Technologies would wait till downtime within a semester. So it might be during the summer, and then once during the fall, like fall break or maybe the winter break, and they would do a whole slew of updates at that time and get everything up to date on certain periods. These days, it's not really a great recommendation because, as you know, security exploits can come out, and, folks will take advantage of those fairly quickly. And so there's the other school of thought on that is, pushing out updates regularly, have some sort of chain there, whether it be a staging server like Curtis mentioned, to where you're able to test things and rapidly deploy them quickly, so that, from one week to the next, you're constantly pushing updates, and there's just this expectation that there's that churn and that things are staying up to date so that you don't turn around and say 3 months from now and you've got 250 updates that you've got to test to make sure something's not going to break. Well, something's probably going to break if you've got to do all of those changes all at once and cross your fingers and hope that it all happens in the right order, that something, detrimental is not going to happen to the system.
To be clear, though, that is as much or worse of a problem with single installs if you were trying to broadcast a series of changes out to lots of single installs, right? So it's not just a multi-site problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, and again, that's where that balancing act comes in as well. It's a matter of, okay, do we manage these 250 plugins from a central location and try and figure out these updates for each individual one, or do we have 100 plugins installed here and 45 plugins installed here, and there are 25 that overlap, and how do we manage those? And we have to go through and do that on each individual, of 1,000 sites or whatever. That would, as I said, that would take forever. Nobody would ever get anything else done. So yeah, I mean, those are the advantages of multi-site when you're talking about a large installation like UMW Blogs. It's just a matter of you still have to watch out for that kind of stuff. And again, the nice thing about UMW Blogs is if a blog is active or a site is active there, if something breaks, somebody's going to find it fairly quickly and let you know about it. Whereas, there's a potential on a large university website where a site could be broken for, a month and nobody lets you know that it's broken, and you don't know it's broken because you're not surfing the entire website every day. So, you've got those situations.
Okay, so we've got a question from Twitter. So are there alternatives to multi-sites that are not completely independent? Coworker floated Docker or Arway, or for instance that. So essentially, are there any alternatives to multi-site that are not completely, that don't give you the complete independence?
The complete independence.
Yeah, I'm not sure what is.
That's the piece I'm not understanding. Yeah.
Are there alternatives to multi-site that are not complete independence?
I suppose that means as opposed to like single sites. So is there a way you can? I guess the alternative in what regards? So the parts of Multipress that are interesting are the shared user table, the shared code base, and like ease of like consistent deployment, like you can deploy it all at once. The shared resources, like for better or worse, it's all the same PHP, MySQL, whatever, so you can cache it all together. I'm not sure what else there is that I'm forgetting, but those are all different factors. So there are lots of ways you can deploy multiple single sites and have it be one deployment, or have it be one set of resources, like one server, one instance of PHP, one instance of MySQL, running lots of sites. So that aspect is pretty easy there's a lot of ways to do that. The shared user table, though, that's pretty unique to multi-site. So if you actually want to have a shared user table across lots of sites, multi-site is awesome. If you don't want a shared user table, but you otherwise want to use multi-site, that's weird. That's a problem we've run into a lot. That's a pretty weird experience.
Well, and I see that the person who tweeted that also followed up with, like, what if you were to run your Uni environment like a web host, which I think speaks more to, like, the domain of one's own approach that Tim could probably speak to, where they're individual shared, hosting accounts, but still they've got, Tim and the folks there still have some sort of control over these kinds of things.
Sure. So we have a lot of schools that are running host, running servers, running cPanel, and the OneClick installer plugins that you've got will often handle a lot of those updates for you if you want to automate some of that stuff. So great if you've got lots of students, lots of faculty setting up their own environments, and you want to give them the control to do that, install their own plugins and themes, but you want some sort of overarching way of knowing that things are being updated regularly. The other thing that I'm aware of, and I'm sure that there are probably multiple companies that do this, but if anyone's heard of Infinite WP, that's at least one solution for sort of managing a large number of single instances. And so similar to the way I guess Jetpack does it in some ways, though I can't imagine using Jetpack with more than 10 or 20 websites, it would get out of hand pretty quickly. But I could imagine, with like Infinite WP or something like that, you could have multiple installs and then know at any given time how many of them need plugin updates done, how many need theme updates, and that kind of thing. You'd still have that separate user table, but you would have some sort of, Hawkeye view of everything that's going on with all of those installs and be able to manage them from some central location.
I think it's still possible too to run, have a system where you run multiple sites off of the same code base. So one installation of WordPress, you could still manage all of your plugins through version control, and then have some kind of logic that separates out and uses the different databases. So at least then you have one op cache storing all your PHP code, and then one management point, and then kind of some crazy PHP after that. There might be an easier way to switch databases.
I remember Chris Owens did a talk in WordCamp Miami that talked about multitenancy.
Yes.
So that actually might be what you're talking about, and might be a good thing to follow up on WordPress.tv once it goes live. So WordPress multi-tenancy, Chris Owens. I can find his Twitter name, and I can put it in the on Twitter down the road. Now the thing is with permissions. How do we manage permissions in multi-site? Because the thing is, you've got multiple sites, but then what happens if a person needs an editor here or author there, or God forbid, admin somewhere else? How do we manage that?
Really, as far as that kind of management goes, there are plugins where you can kind of normalize things across an installation. So if somebody needed like admin access across or editor access across or something like that, there are plugins where you can kind of tick boxes to make somebody an editor on multiple sites and things like that. But from our perspective, a lot of it is you're not necessarily gaining anything in that regard by using multi-site over individual instances. Except that it's a little easier to add them. You can just, kind of go to that site and make them an editor rather than having to add them and potentially confirm their email and all that kind of stuff. Potentially have new login information and all that kind of stuff. Now, again, there are plugins where you can kind of tick boxes and say, I want this person to be an editor on these sites and stuff like that. There are plugins where, for instance, we're still using a plugin on our large gargantuan installation that hooks directly into Active Directory, and there are plugins where we can say if they're in this user group within Active Directory, automatically give them these permissions and stuff like that. So you got those options as well. But there's still a matter of, for the most part, if somebody needs to be an editor here and an author here and a contributor here, where you still have to kind of go in a lot of cases and manually make those changes.
Can you actually create like brand new roles for people as opposed to using the default roles in WordPress?
So there's like the nice thing about multi-site is that out of the box you can give different people different roles on each site, and you can certainly write in or find plugins that let you create custom roles per site. And at a baseline, that sounds great. So let me pose a challenge we ran into with both Harvard and Stanford. There is an admissions department, and there is a publicity department, and I don't know, like student support department. I mean, there's lots of departments, right? And they all want to be able to manage different pages on the main site and have access to their subsites and other things. But they wanted to not have everyone have access to every page. So we got in this weird spot where we're like, well, should we make multi-site where each site is a different department and then we just sort of smush them all together into one experience? Or do we end up making like a big site but doing a really weird thing with permissions? And we ended up doing the latter, but I'm curious how you guys have faced that. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I know that in So Shelley's not here physically in my office right now, but she worked at Southern Arkansas University before she came here to University of Mary Washington. When they set up their system, they gave users permissions for individual pages rather than splitting it out into multiple sites for each department. And a lot of it depends on your information architecture. I mean, if admissions needs to sit next to student life in that information architecture, then splitting it out into multiple sites may not make sense. But if they can kind of live in their own silos where they can have their own permissions, multi-site's certainly easier to manage those permissions. But you can do page-by-page permissions for people, or even for roles and groups.
I know that Boston University has a plugin, BU Navigation plugin, and they actively support that, and that actually allows you the ability to give those page-by-page permissions. I personally haven't used it, but I was looking into it a long time ago when we were setting up our multi-site for our main web presence.
It's one of our favorite plugins.
There you go.
Wait, what's it called again?
The BU Navigation plugin. If you search for Boston WordPress navigation, you'll find it.
Cool.
And I actually wasn't sure that it did that.
As opposed to if you search for Boston Dynamics robot. Robot.
Then you'll fear for your life.
Yeah.
The other one we use for that is Editorial Access Manager. I think that's Taylor Lovett's. And that it gives you a little box that lets you choose on every page who has editorial access to it. So you can have subscribers on the site or contributors or authors or whatever, and then on individual pages give them access to edit the page.
Nice.
So something we've been working on, but we haven't released because it's still sort of work in progress, is the ability to build groups of content and groups of people and like assign groups to each other so that you can say like all of these pages are in a group and they work with this group of people who all have permission to use it. I don't know if those plugins do that sort of thing, but that's where we ended up with Stanford and Harvard.
Yeah, and that's I'll tell you, I mean, there's some functionality that at this point doesn't work as well as it used to when we started. But when we first launched the new UMW website, we had Ron Rennick write us a plugin called Document Repository. It was meant to be a central repository for like PDFs and Word documents and things like that. And it used the same type of idea where there were document roles, and then so if anybody within that document role created a document, anybody within that same document role was able to update that.
Nice.
And so it was meant to basically create permalinks for documents. So if we updated, this PDF to a new PDF, the link didn't change to that. But people could still link to revisions if they needed to. And so it's that document role capability there that kind of connected, that idea there, so that you could, one role can manage this particular set of content.
One other, I know we're getting close to the end, so I just wanted to throw in one other benefit of multi-site. We were tasked with one of the projects with the school had lots and lots of students making different websites that were just like from scratch. And they're sort of all over the place in terms of security and also in terms of branding. Like they would take the university's brand and like it just looked horrible. So using multi-site and having like a consistent set of themes that they could use, they're no longer the role of the student in that case isn't about coding, it's about content. And they're not going to mess up the brand because we can have some level of control over how the brand gets delivered. So it's one of the nice things that sort of panned out about multi-site.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. And then when we make brand updates, being able to push it out to 1,000 sites at once rather than trying to figure out how you're going to get everybody to get on board.
Right. It's interesting with the folks that I've talked to that are either running multi-site or running, putting stuff in the hands of students and faculty themselves. There's usually, it goes either way. Either they want a consistent brand across all of them, or they don't want you to ever use their brand whatsoever. They say don't use our logo, don't use anything. We want to pretend that you don't exist. So it's either one or the other in terms of complete control or complete chaos. Depending on how much the school wants to have their hands into what the students and faculty are actually doing with their spaces and what the needs of the space are.
Yeah, and that's a lot of it is what the needs of the space are. But the nice thing is that with, and this isn't necessarily unique to multi-site, especially with the API and things like that that are coming into their own. But you can share. It's very easy within multi-site to write a plugin essentially that shares a common header and footer or something like that across the system, where you're not necessarily controlling the entire brand for their website, but you're still making sure that the pieces that are important carry across, and then essentially they can choose their own, any theme they want, but they're still going to have that branding, that branding information included there as well. So.
The one thing we didn't cover that I would have loved to, and I don't know where we're on a time, but like cross-posting, maybe like a different session on that or something, but I'm talking about like how you get content from one site to another, and
I could absolutely see us doing a completely separate podcast on kind of content syndication and cross-posting and things like that.
Sure.
Jeremy just wrote a great article about using the API to share the directory information across the system. And we're doing the same thing with campus advisories, so I could absolutely see a whole other episode simply on syndication and cross-posting.
Sure, we can definitely follow with different talks on different podcasts on how do we take the content and syndicate it out? How do we we can even further dive deeper into plugins and dive deeper into permissions and how to manage multi-site. This is just the tip of the iceberg on this podcast and also on multi-site specifically. That's it for time-wise. So I just want to thank everybody for participating in the podcast, and I just want to shout out to the 13 viewers that we have. Thank you for watching. And that's about it. So have a good one, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.